السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أرحب وأنا زيد الرقيب بالحضور الكرام ممثلا عن المركز الوطني للتعليم الإلكتروني من العاصمة الرياض بالمملكة العربية السعودية. يسعدنا اليوم أن نقدم لكم هذه الندوة الافتراضية بعنوان كفاءات الذكاء الاصطناعي للمعلمين من الإلمام إلى التفعيل المسؤول، والتي نسعى من خلالها إلى بناء فهم وظيفي أعمق لتقنيات الذكاء الاصطناعي وآليات عملها ضمن السياقات التعليمية المختلفة. سنتناول كيف يمكن لهذه التقنيات أن تندمج بفاعلية في بيئات التعليم من خلال تعزيز التكامل بين أدوات التحليل الذكي وعمليات التقييم، والتي ستسهم في توجيه التعلم وتحسين نتائجه. كما سنسلط الضوء على أهمية ترسيخ مفاهيم النزاهة والمسؤولية في استخدام البيانات التعليمية لضمان ممارسات أخلاقية ومستدامة. ونتطلع في ختام هذه الجلسة إلى تمكين المعلمين من التعرف على مسارات مهنية واعدة في الذكاء الاصطناعي بما يتناسب مع كفاياتهم التعليمية والرقمية، سعيا نحو مستقبل تعليمي أكثر ذكاء. وللتنويه، ستكون الترجمة الفورية للغة العربية ولغة الإشارة متاحة خلال هذه الندوة، وبإمكانكم الآن الضغط على أيقونة الترجمة أسفل الشاشة. Greetings from the National E-Learning Center in the city of Riyadh, the capital of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I'm Zaid Al-Raqib. We are delighted to welcome each participant to today's webinar on AI competencies for educators, evolving from literacy into responsible practice. In this session, we will explore how educators can develop a functional understanding of AI technologies and the way they operate across diverse educational settings. We will also look at how intelligent analysis tools can be meaningfully integrated into assessment processes to better support student learning and improve outcomes. A key part of our discussion will focus on the ethical dimensions, how we can instill a strong sense of integrity and responsibility when working with educational data. Ultimately, our goal is to empower educators to chart professional pathways in AI, building on their existing educational and digital competencies to engage with these technologies in informed, impactful, and responsible ways. We're delighted to welcome the distinguished panelists, Professor Chris Dede, Senior Research Fellow at Harvard University, Dr. Hassa Al-Angari, Assistant Professor of Instructional Systems Technology at Princess Noura University, Ms. Jessica Garner, Senior Director for Innovative Learning at STASCD, and our very own Dr. Fatma Al-Gahtani, the Studies and Consulting Manager at the National E-Learning Center, who will be moderating this session. We thank these distinguished speakers for joining us today. So without further delay, we hand over the virtual floor to our moderator, Dr. Fatma Al-Gahtani.
Thank you, Zaid, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar, AI Competencies for Educators, invites us to look beyond basic awareness. It's about developing the skills, the mindset, and ethical grounding needed to navigate in this fast-changing landscape. The conversation around AI in education has come a long way, and we're no longer just talking about what AI is, but how we, as educators and decision makers, can engage with it in a meaningful and responsible way. We will hear today from our inspiring speakers who will help us to explore the key competencies, the practical strategies, and critical questions, not just for the classroom, but for the future of education itself. I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker, Professor Chris, who will help us to explore how foundational AI competencies are evolving and what that means for educators today. Professor Chris, please join us and you may start your presentation.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to share ideas. And I'm quite impressed by the size of the audience at this webinar. It's wonderful that so many of you have chosen to share your time with us today. So a little bit of background about myself and AI. In 1970, over half a century ago, when I was a graduate student, I read the very first article published on AI in education. And the author of that article confidently predicted that by the end of the 1970s, we wouldn't need teachers anymore. Obviously, that wasn't a very good prediction. And since then, I've lived through 9 hype cycles of AI. So about every 5 years, there's progress in AI. The optimists declare that we now have digital deities. The pessimists declare that the Terminator is coming for us. And the last 9 hype cycles, the extremes have been wrong, and they're also wrong in this 10th hype cycle. So what I want to give you is a balanced perspective that draws on a long-range view of the history of AI. In addition to being a senior research fellow at Harvard University, I am Associate Director of Research for one of the 27 national AI institutes that the United States National Science Foundation sponsors. I'm part of the one on adult learning and online education, which is basically about workforce entry, upskilling, and reskilling. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. But the fundamental question to start with is, if AI is the answer, what is the question? And this is something that we see again and again with learning technologies, is that advocates say, well, the technology itself is the innovation. If you just use AI, then magic things are going to happen. And we know from history that that is not true. There is no magic device. There is no magic piece of software. But what technology can do is not be the innovation itself, but to be the catalyst for an innovation, something that we know is powerful in teaching and learning that now becomes possible because of the technology. So literacy is really about understanding what is empowered rather than some kind of a magical view of the technology itself. Now, there's many frameworks for AI literacies, and because this is a relatively short talk today, I'm going to use a fairly simple one. This is based on Selber's work in digital literacies in general and in literacies in general. And it has 3 dimensions. The functional dimension is about how. How do you use the technology in order to get a benefit from it? The critical dimension is about concerns. When is using the technology not a good idea? Or how do you use it in a way that doesn't create problems? Because we have to remember that all technologies are double-edged swords. They can be used for good, they can be used poorly or in ways that do not improve the situation. And then the rhetorical dimension is about empowerment. Not the empowerment of AI, but the empowerment of human beings by using AI. So let me try to illustrate this by talking about an example that we're all familiar with that's outside of digital technologies, the development of reading and writing as a very basic kind of literacy. And so narrowly, you can say, well, if you learn to read and if you learn to write in school, then you have the basic technical literacy. But if we look at reading and writing, we see that beyond just the manipulation of alphanumeric characters, that when you understand how to complement those with images or tables or graphs, then the communication becomes much more powerful. And so schooling doesn't just focus on reading and writing as a literacy, it focuses on parallel literacies like numeracy and math, and literacies in other fields like science and inquiry. But if you go beyond schooling and start to look at libraries of textual material put everything under one roof. It's a new kind of invention. And so the literacy of understanding how the library works, how you can use its categories to navigate to knowledge, how you can cross-reference to bring different perspectives to bear, how you can access libraries even where there isn't schooling. Those are all important forms of literacies for textual material. And at the largest level, what we're constructing is pervasive learning ecosystems that can enable lifelong capacity building, something I'll talk about more later in connection with the AI Institute that I'm part of. So my point in this is to say that if you just say reading and writing is the literacy, you miss all these other dimensions, that the technical literacy itself isn't simply functional, it's a socio-technical literacy that looks at all the ways that society has changed that can empower people because of the use of the technology. So when we look at AI, you see a lot of things that say, well, the basic technical literacy is prompt engineering and knowing how to take an app and use it, use the different kinds of capabilities that it empowers. And that is the basic literacy. But it's important to go beyond the basic literacy technically, just as it is with reading and writing. And in the limited time, I'm going to share two things as illustrations of going beyond the basic technical literacy. One of them is about personalization, and the other is about IA, intelligence augmentation. So the National AI Institute that I'm part of is creating different kinds of AI assistants that help the teachers of adults and help adult learners to master different kinds of material as part of upskilling and reskilling and entering the workforce. And on the front end, the AI is used to create an intriguing user interface that's motivating and that's understandable and that helps people learn. And on the back end, the AI is used for machine learning and data analytics and multimodal analytics to take all the rich streams of data, process data that can come out of the front end, find patterns in that, and then feed those patterns back into teachers, into learners, but now also into AI assistants. So there's another dimension to this than the standard diagram with teachers, learners, and data at the back end. The AI enables richer analysis of data, including spoken or textual data, and it also becomes part of the instructional partnership that uses the feedback and that gets the feedback. So I think about myself as a teacher of adults, and over time, I'm going to become surrounded by different kinds of AI agents, content tutors, question answering agents, laboratory, library, even social assistants that can help students in a large online class find good learning partners for each other. And those do valuable things in isolation, and my institute studies this, but they also can do valuable things together. So if the content tutor and the question answering tutor and the library tutor all start to share what they know about a particular student, they can get a richer picture, a more personalized picture of how to help that student. So that going beyond individual agents to understanding the interactions among agents is important. In fact, we can imagine agents forming communities of practice where AI agents across different courses or different learning experiences are sharing information about a particular student, or they're sharing information about what the instructor knows and how the instructor might be able to help other instructors with different kinds of instructional resources. But let's go back to me at the center of this, because I can either be de-skilled by what's happening, or I can upskill. If I just let all of these agents take over parts of my role, and I just sit back and have increased leisure time, or maybe I put it into my research or my faculty meetings or some other thing, there isn't much improvement in the process. You're just substituting. But if I upskill and I take the time that's made available to much more deeply understand my students, their culture, their individual passions, their strengths, and their needs, now I have a very powerful form of personalization, way beyond what I can do, because as a human being, I understand other people much better than an AI does. So part of this is understanding how we upskill human beings, not simply how we use AI. And this leads me to the topic of IA, which I spend a lot of time thinking about, intelligence augmentation. And a quick way of explaining IA is to say that AI does what it does well, which is called reckoning, calculative prediction, and human beings do the rest of the task, what they do well, judgment, which is practical wisdom. An example would be what's happening now with doctors who treat cancer. If they have an AI partner, that partner can do things that no human being can do. It can scan thousands of medical journals every morning to look for new additions that might inform the treatment of a particular patient. It can scan online patient records all across the world, similarly, looking for insights. But you would never want the AI agent interacting with the patient that the doctor is treating, because the doctor and healthcare workers in general understand things that no AI can understand, that some people want quality of life and other people want quantity, that human beings experience pain and that that's part of therapy, that families are affected by choices about therapy, and there are spiritual beliefs connected with it and personal and cultural beliefs connected with it. And all of that is really important. So IA is the whole being more than the sum of the parts, based on the agents doing what they can do. And I'll go back to this diagram to say they're playing their reckoning roles, but then I have to play a better judgment role to get the benefit from it. So if we step back from this kind of analysis of all the dimensions of technical literacy, and I've illustrated just two with these communities of practice and this idea of IA, intelligence augmentation, we have to remember that learning literacy, as opposed to using literacy, is a journey. And the important thing is not the destination, but the journey itself. So all of us as who teach ask our students to produce artifacts of different kinds, an essay or a work of art or a symphony or a computer program. And we look at that proxy for learning and evaluate it. But if the student didn't produce the proxy, if an AI produced the proxy or another human being produced the proxy, then the student hasn't actually learned. And there's a lot of naive thinking about AI where people say, well, students don't learn to write anymore. They don't need to learn to write because AI is going to do all the writing. Well, when a student learns to write, they're learning how to take their own original thoughts and express them in a way that inspires others. When they simply edit what an AI has written, none of that is happening. And so the original thoughts of human beings are lost when AI does all the writing. And you can make similar illustrations with other things about handing over to AI things that are very important for human creativity. So I'll say just a little about critical and rhetorical literacies, given the limited time. It's important to understand that Gen AI is not artificial general intelligence, AGI. And there's a lot of companies right now that are raising hundreds of billions of dollars by saying that they're on the brink of artificial general intelligence. I strongly believe that that is not true, and I and others are very skeptical about these claims, which are motivated more by self-interest than by evidence. That's a whole nother talk. I'll give you a resource where you can go and learn about that. But just this year, just looking at recent publications, there's all sorts of limits on what AI can do that mean that if you're working with it, you'd better understand that it really only does reckoning well. And the minute you start asking it to do more than that, you're undercutting very important things about what human beings can do. So ultimately, remember that critical and rhetorical literacy is about empowerment, human empowerment, not just AI empowerment. One of the things that keeps me up at night is that we're missing the point with what AI enables. That people look at AI and they use it to do things better. They use it to automate what they're doing now. So they say, oh, great, this can make lesson plans for me. This can make quizzes for me. This can make podcasts out of articles for me, et cetera, et cetera. But the real power of any technological advancement is not just doing things better, it's doing better things. It's doing things like intelligence augmentation that opens up new forms of personalization. It's doing things like digital communities of practice of AI that open up deeper forms of personalization. And I worry that we're just holding together an obsolete model of education by using AI as a kind of efficiency mechanism for doing the wrong thing faster. So I just want to close by talking about several thousand years ago, the goddess of wisdom. The Greek goddess of wisdom, called Athena, is always shown as having an owl on her shoulder. And when the Romans conquered the Greeks, they changed the name of the goddess to Minerva, but they kept the owl. This is a very interesting concept, that to be wise, you have this kind of sidekick, something that helps you to be wise that isn't you, but it's not a mentor. It's on your shoulder. It's a subordinate partner. And it's very important that we think about what kind of owl AI might be without necessarily thinking that we're the ones who are sitting on the owl's shoulder, that it's always a subordinate partner. So if you found this of interest, my website is a repository with all sorts of things on it, other talks, blogs, published academic articles, etc. Please go and take a look. And I look forward to the other speakers and to having a discussion about this very interesting challenge of AI and literacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chris, for this insightful presentation. We are very fortunate to have you with us, as you have given us a historical view of how AI is evolving. And one idea that has really resonated was reframing of AI through the lens of intelligence augmentation, a concept that is both refreshing and deeply needed for today's discourse. Too often, conversation about AI in education focus in a narrow way on automation, streamlining tasks, grading, scheduling, but the way you describe IA as a partnership between human and machines, enhancing rather than replacing the human judgment, which really reframes the potential of AI in a very powerful way. Professor Chris, since you mentioned the 3 dimensions of AI literacy, starting from the functional dimension, which focus on practical skills needed for AI tools and technologies, moving to the critical dimension and the rhetorical dimension, how do you envision the balance between the technical fluency and the pedagogical expertise evolving? Can the educator without a strong technical background still lead meaningful AI integrated learning?
Definitely. And what I want to point out, and this isn't simply true of AI, it's true of EdTech in general. It's easier for someone who deeply understands education to gain the technical knowledge they need to use the technology than it is for a technical person who deeply understands the technology to gain the educational knowledge they need to fully understand teaching and learning and assessment. Teaching, learning, and assessment, frankly, is much more complicated than the kind of technical fluency that people need to use a well-designed tool. So it's important to remember as an educator that you're already most of the way there in terms of developing the literacy if you build on what you already know about learning and motivation. But what you can do is to develop your technical literacy to get farther. And again, I'm encouraging thinking of technical literacy not just in the narrow way that reading and writing is technical literacy for text, but in a broader way where understanding IA, understanding personalization, understanding the other dimensions that I sketched and many other dimensions that are a part of other AI frameworks, because this was just a very quick, narrow overview. That kind of technical literacy is something that the teachers can deeply contribute to without having much technical background.
I totally agree with you. And saying that, for educators who are curious but yet unsure how to begin, what do you think the small practical way that they can start using AI in an augmentative rather than automative way?
Well, I'll use an example of a teacher who has a student teacher come to join them. So you've got now a junior partner that you're mentoring and helping. And the first thing that you do when you have that is you give them some tasks and see what they know and don't know. So you ask them to work with a small group of students, or you ask them to manage a group of unruly students, or you ask them to teach a particular lesson, and then you see what they do well and where they need help. And think of that owl of AI as similar. You want to see what the owl can and can't do. So don't begin by asking it something you don't know. Begin by asking it to do something that you know how to do well. Take your best lesson plan and ask the owl of AI to produce a lesson plan on the same subject, and then look at what it gives you. And you'll see that it's incomplete in important ways, that it's flawed in important ways, but it might also have some things in it, just as a student teacher might, that you hadn't thought about, that are of interest to you. So I would say that the best place to begin is to kick the tires based on what you already know and begin to understand the strengths and the limits of the particular AI that you're working with.
Amazing. It's really encouraging to know that educators don't need to leap into a large-scale reform to get started. Just a thoughtful, human-centered experiment with AI can already begin to shift on how they can teach, reflect, and even connect. Thank you so much, Professor Chris. Now, building on that foundation, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Hissa Al-Angari, who will share a powerful insights on how Saudi Arabia is shaping AI literacy and what it truly means for educators to engage with AI in a responsible way. Dr. Hissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Fatma, and thank you, Professor Chris, for your, as usual, we're always inspired by your work. So besides being an assistant professor at PNU, I also serve as a consultant, a tech consultant here in Saudi Arabia. And I was an EdSafe 2024 Women in AI Fellow, as well as currently I'm leading an EdTech company here in Saudi Arabia. I'm the CEO of Ultimate Learning Academy. And today I'm going to be introducing the National E-Learning Center's AI in Education, or AI in Digital Learning Competencies framework. This was actually a labor of love by the team at NELC, which I was grateful to be a part of. The framework is designed to help educators move beyond basic AI literacy towards responsible, effective, and ethical integration of AI in teaching. It offers clear guidance on the categories of AI to support AI augmented teaching and learning. We did take inspiration from Professor Didi's work. So I'd love to share. So building on Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, which includes a key pillar of thriving economy under Vision 2030 and building a innovative skilled workforce to drive growth and prosperity within Saudi Arabia. And underneath the Vision 2030, one of the very inspirational programs is the Human Capability Development Program. This was launched in 2021, and it is to help Saudi citizens succeed at every stage of life. It helps align and bridge the gap between education and workforce development, meeting the needs of future workforce, fostering innovation, building skills, etc. And the AI literacy with, NELC defines AI literacy as the ability to understand, evaluate, and responsibly engage with AI technologies. The aim, again, is to equip citizens with future-ready skills, to strengthen the workforce, foster innovation, and contribute to the kingdom's role in shaping the global future of education, recognizing limitations and biases, critically evaluating outcomes, etc., so on and so forth. My apologies. I don't know why that was. Yes. Okay. My screen is not moving. Okay, there we go. So we began by benchmarking against, first of all, major organizations such as UNESCO, the World Economic Forum, and OECD, Digital Promise, and as well as with countries such as Canada, China, Finland, Germany, Japan, Singapore, the United Kingdom, and the United States. We did draw guidance from NELC's AI and Digital Learning Framework, SEDAIA's Generative AI in Education Guide, and the International Center for Research and Ethics, ICARE, AI Ethics and Policy. And then we also did some competency mapping with all of the organizations, the countries listed, and the local, as well as leaning on local guidance. So the AI augmented teaching framework by the National E-Learning Center has 7 different categories, ranging from AI literacy to data management to ethics and responsibility, assessment evaluation, pedagogical integration, learner support, ethics, and professional development. And a lot of thought and a lot of work went into developing this framework to make sure that not only did it encompass the AI competencies that are currently used globally, but to also integrate cultural considerations when applying the framework. The first of the categories is AI literacy and technical knowledge. It is divided into 3 competencies: understanding AI fundamentals, tool evaluation, and technical implementation. There was a description provided for each competency, and then the different levels from basic, intermediate to advanced. And of course, the goal being advanced levels at some point. The key concepts such as machine learning and data analytics, etc. It's all to ensure that educators can make informed and responsible decisions and to create engaging, personalized learning experiences for our learners. The second category is pedagogical integration. The competencies listed there are instructional design, adaptive learning design, learning support mechanisms, and again, each one with its description and the different levels included. Along with, this is to help educators create engaging, student-centered learning experiences to improve outcome. And this is very essential as a lot of the educational reform that happened in parts of the world had more of rote learning maybe 10, 20 years ago. And currently it is more student-centered, it is more project-based, problem-based, engaging higher order thinking skills. So that's kind of where the shift is also happening locally and within the region as well. The third category is assessment and evaluation. The competencies listed there are assessment design, learning analytics, and progress monitoring. It is also to measure and understand student learning, designing adaptive assessments, adjusting to individual needs, providing immediate and personalized feedback. And AI-powered learning analytics are really helping educators right now track student progress and student performance, identify patterns in order to step in as needed. and predict some challenges. And again, with AI, when you are working in a context where English is one of the languages used, however, it is not the main language used, sometimes AI can really help with the language learning component and to help students really understand the content. And just in general, be it like a support. Again, it's augmented learning, like Professor Chris mentioned. In EdTech, we don't see digital technology as the goal, we see it as a tool, hence why it is AI augmented. The next category is ethics and responsibility. The competencies listed there are ethical AI use, privacy protection, and bias recognition. And it is important to mention here that the ethical challenges that AI does present that we need to actually, as educators, address. One of the issues that a lot of us educators face is, and especially in this part of the world, is that AI does not understand cultural nuances, and hence there's certain things, the way AI or certain ways generative AI or ChatGPT or whatever tool you're using may not really give you the full picture if you decided to ask it for support or, and this is how I use it with my students as well, is to support and enhance their learning, not to replace it. And it's very important when it comes to data privacy and ethics, and I will discuss that in a little bit as well. And also this recognize and mitigate the biases that are within the AI systems to prevent discrimination, to promote equity, and so on and so forth. The next category is assessment evaluation. My apologies, I don't know why that one is up. Scrap that, it's professional development. Here under professional development, continuous learning and collaborative practice, it focuses on equipping educators with the knowledge and skills. Again, don't mind the title, the knowledge and skills and attitudes or behaviors necessary to integrate AI effectively and to augment their teaching practices. In order to emphasize lifelong learning in professional development, we always try to encourage educators to be lifelong learners, to be, the concept of continuous learning, etc., is very important. Professional learning communities, educators learning from one another and getting the support from other educators and from experts as well. So it encourages the collaborative nature of being an educator and sharing ideas. Data management includes the competencies of data analytics and resource allocation. This is important as it is crucial for the effective AI augmented teaching, organizing and analyzing educational data, and to guide informed decisions. Basically, if you look at the different levels, from basic to advanced, again, we want to be able to build AI models eventually, possibly, and that would be a very advanced educator. However, if they could collect and organize basic data sets, that's great. They have basic literacy. If they can use AI for basic resource management, excellent. They go up to intermediate level, even better, and so on and so forth. So it highlights also the gaps that help schools to distribute their tools and the resources, to allocate resources where they need it most, ensuring that all learners have an equitable chance at getting good education. Learner support would be the last of the competencies. It includes inclusive practice and personalized support. Here we are creating, again, inclusive and personalized learning experiences. The tools are here to help educators address all these students' diverse needs, to help personalize their learning, to offer adaptive platforms and language support, which is essential, again, in this part of the world, especially if students are English as second language or English as foreign language learners. And and so on and so forth. It also helps to tailor learning pathways, and recommend some resources, provide targeted feedback. And again, in the end, we want learners to be engaged and motivated, and that is our job as educators, is to make sure that not only are they engaged and motivated, but also learners and educators have the self-efficacy and confidence to use AI and integrate it within their learning. Now, if you notice in the framework itself, ethics and data privacy is an overarching circle, and that is because it is a guiding principle. It informs all the other categories, and is essential as we move into the future of AI and generative AI, that we consider ethics and our data privacy very essential, and focus on fairness, transparency, privacy, and responsible data use, or responsible data use. A lot of times we find that when we integrate digital technology, we lose some forms of data privacy, or personal privacy as well. And especially in some parts of the world, privacy is very important, but also on the level of data privacy is equally or even more important, as nobody wants their data all over the internet. And ethical considerations are very, very important. We teach this to our students. We teach this to our faculty members. We actually, when we are providing professional development or upskilling courses to adult educators, we make sure that they understand fully the ethics of generative AI use in education and their teaching and learning practices, and the importance of data privacy in their work. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hassa, for such a rich presentation. Before I go asking you, I would like to draw the audience attention to the Q&A box, where they can post their questions to our distinguished speakers, and we'll try to answer them at the open discussion. Dr. Hassa, I like how you highlighted both technical and human dimension of AI in education, especially the idea that as we gain access to more data and tools, we also need to evolve our mindset, our competencies, and even our professional identities as educators. I would like to ask you, how do you think these competencies, the National E-Learning Center's competencies, can help educators to move beyond basic AI literacy to a responsible practice?
Thank you, Dr. Fatma, for the question. So the NELC's AI and Digital Learning Competencies Framework is actually there to provide a clear and structured guidance across all of these competencies for educators and learners as well. It emphasizes ethical, inclusive, and responsible AI use in teaching. It supports continuous professional development for all educators, and this is something that we constantly work with in upskilling faculty members, et cetera, and designing strategies for some of the public-private partnerships to build capacity. It helps educators critically evaluate and select appropriate AI tools, especially when you are newer to a digital technology tool. Sometimes you need the guidance and support, and how do I use it? For instance, we had 2 years ago, some faculty members, we did a workshop on integrating or using AI for teaching and learning, and this workshop was actually specifically targeted towards pharmacy residents. And within the course or the module that we presented, we had the pharmacy students actually ask ChatGPT a question about the differences between, I think it was acetaminophen and another type of a drug. And it was very interesting, as the students themselves or the residents were the ones that were critiquing the answers. They found an incorrect piece of information there. They also found some information that would have been very relevant for somebody to know that was not included. And I think it helped them really understand. So having these competencies, having this framework will help the educators themselves design more personalized adaptive learning and enable to make sure that the learning process itself is engaging, but also supports the ethics of use in general. So
amazing. And being a faculty member at the university, I want to ask you, as AI become more integrated into education, do you feel like your identity as an educator is changing?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I know in the university and any actually, whether it's, K-12 or higher education or even lifelong learning, we have an issue of plagiarism. And so our role is becoming it's increasingly difficult as we try to discover how students, if they have plagiarized or not, et cetera. And I think it's more powerful to teach students how to use AI to enhance and support their learning, and for teachers to use it as a guide, or as a facilitator, myself as a facilitator, to really kind of redirect them in the right direction when they are, educating others and teaching them exactly how am I going to integrate generative AI within my coursework, how am I going to integrate it in my research and my teaching, etc. So, and then there's a shift in the collaboration with technology. It's no longer about delivering content, it's about collaborating with AI, if you will, allowing AI to help you encourage or enhance and build self-efficacy. To be honest, a lot of educators find they're very scared to use AI at the beginning because they're not sure how to go about it, and there's no 100% right way to do one thing. There are a lot of various ways to integrate AI, and for myself, I see it just as supporting the culture of continuous learning, helping faculty and students adapt responsibly to AI use.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I totally agree with you that it's not only about generating content anymore. It's about collaborating, and for the educators equipping themselves with the necessary skills that they need to have in order to, because they're not the only the only ones who leading the educational process here. The students can engage, they can critique, as you mentioned, the content and the outputs of the generative AI and content. So it's very important that the educators both know where they are with the skills that they need to have in order to adopt AI in their educational process. Thank you so much, Dr. Hassa. Now, to continue building on this rich conversation, I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Jessica, who will take us beyond the language and efficiency into the realm of the true transformation, grounded into the transformational learning principles. Jessica, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon to those of you that are not in the morning at this time. I'm really excited to be here with you all. As Dr. Fatima mentioned, my name is Jessica Garner, and I currently work for ISTE ASCD. I'll talk a little bit more about ISTE ASCD in just a second, but I do want to share that I have approached this work really with the heart of an educator. I was a teacher for 13 years. During that time, I was named the North Carolina Teacher of the Year, and that really shifted the trajectory of my journey. From there, my heart was with my students in the classroom, but I just really started to see this different world of education that went all the way from the national policy level down to your local school board and the impact that that has on the classroom. And so as I think about the impact that AI is having on our classrooms, I approach it first from the heart of a teacher and thinking about what that means for teaching and learning, what it means for our students. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about some of the exciting work that I get to do, which is working directly with educators. That's my favorite part of my job. And so I'm really excited to share a little bit about that with you this morning or afternoon. So ISTE-ASCD is the merge of two companies. We merged about 2 years ago, and ISTE was the International Society for Technology and Education. ASCD was more of a curriculum-focused organization. And when we came together, it was this realization that curriculum and technology should not be separated. They should be one and the same because, again, as has been mentioned this morning, technology is really about it's really just a tool. So our mission at ISTE-ASCD is really about empowering educators to do a lot of what we've talked about today, which is reimagining and redesigning learning through both pedagogy as well as meaningful technology use. So our company, essentially what we do, we offer transformative professional learning. We have some vibrant learning communities, and then we also ensure that digital tools and experiences are accessible and effective. And it's really our vision that all students would have the opportunity to engage in transformative learning experiences that spark their imagination and prepare them to thrive in learning and life. So one of the things that I really enjoy doing is delivering professional learning. And so the first thing that I usually do in my sessions is to invite people to think about the most awesome learning experience that they have observed or participated in. And so I want to give you just a second to think about, and this doesn't have anything, this does not necessarily have to connect with AI, because I'm sure that there are those of you in the audience who are very comfortable with artificial intelligence and those of you who are just getting started. But I want you to just think about an awesome learning experience. Maybe you were a teacher and you facilitated that experience. Maybe you are an administrator and you walked into a classroom and saw it happening. So I'm going to give you just a second to think about it. All right, hopefully you have that in your head. And this is the goal for us with our students. And Professor Chris talked a little bit about this whole idea of, and I'm just going to, kind of look at what you said, that, the destination is the journey. And so I want to just share, these are the transformational learning principles that ISTE-ASCD launched in June of last year. These are a key part of our organizational mission and vision. And we really believe that they bring this focus and this common language to our efforts as we work alongside schools and educators to ensure that all students have access to impactful and joyful learning experiences. And so if you take a look at these, they're organized in 3 different areas of nurture, guide, and empower. And you can, if you use the QR code to go to the actual site, you'll see a larger description of each one, but you can see the titles of the 8 areas that we take a look at with these transformational learning principles. And so I want you to take a minute and think about that learning experience that you had in your mind. And hopefully you can find one or more of those transformational learning principles that in that activity that you just thought about. So I would invite you, as we think about this journey, these transformational learning principles, that's what we keep at the center. And I do want to just make a comment about them, because a lot of frameworks, if you will, are very focused on educators, which is great. The one that we're talking about today is focused on educators, and it is super important to equip the educators. But the focus of these transformational learning principles is about the experience for students. And so I think that when we look at the use of artificial intelligence through the lens of how are we shifting the experience for students to make their learning experience better, to me, that's where you get into the power of AI to make education better, and not just, continue to make ineffective teaching practices more efficient, which is also something that Professor Chris talked about. And so that's what we are working on every day at ISTE-ASCD. And so one of the other pieces that we like to take a look at, and I'm going to connect this a little bit to what we've already been talking about. This comes from Gen AI and the expertise paradox, but I love this framing. This is the value of critical thinking. And it's really this idea that on the x-axis, you have your level of knowledge of the topic. And on the y-axis, you have your knowledge of AI. And as we've talked about before already this morning, if you have this really high knowledge of how to use artificial intelligence, but you have a really low knowledge of the topic, what's going to end up happening is that you get this false confidence. And so I loved when Professor Chris answered the question around getting started with AI by doing something that you already know that you're good at, to see how well it works. Because when you have the high knowledge of the topic and a high knowledge of AI, it allows you to have that critical thinking where you can be you can make that judgment decision, and you get that expert advantage. You get the dual expert, if you will. So you may have the expert advantage, but if you don't have the knowledge of AI, you're going to miss out on some of those other ideas that you may not have seen. So we love to just to kind of think about how important it is that critical thinking stays at the center of this work. So one of my main responsibilities at ISTE ASCD is to lead an initiative that we are calling Generation AI, which is really this idea of creating the next generation of AI innovators in education. And so we have 6 coalition partners that we work with. This is an initiative that is funded by google.org. And so again, this is part of our goal. We are trying to reach over 200,000 educators with the message that AI, really, we need to move past just efficiency into transforming the learning experiences for students. And so you can see on the screen our 6 different partners: Center for Black Educator Development, Computer Science Teachers Association, Indigitize, which works with Indigenous educators and students, Latinos for Education, PlayLab, that's a really interesting organization that allows educators to learn about AI as they build with AI and build for their students. And then we're also working with the National Education Association. So we've organized our work with these 6 organizations into 3 different levels of activities. And so I'm going to actually go backwards on this slide here. The first one is sparking engagement. And so this is the idea that for the majority of the people that we're going to reach, the majority of that 200,000 plus, we want to just spark their interest in AI. We want to give them enough that they can think a little bit differently about their practice and just have their curiosity piqued a little bit. So in that sparking engagement, it's just one interaction with educators. That might be at our conference. We just held our first co-located conference in San Antonio, and we had over 16,000 attendees there. And so we had main stage presentations and, short hour-long sessions, lots of hour-long sessions focused around AI for educators to just learn a little bit. We are also going to be putting out a video series. So part of our work at our conference was to interview different educators and ask them about their experiences with AI, because one of the things that we have heard as we have been delivering professional learning is that educators are curious how other people are using AI. What are some practical ways and some practical examples of how I can use AI as an educator in my practice? And so we interviewed dozens of educators at our conference and asked them just to share something that their students have done with AI that surprised them, a piece of advice, a practical example. And so we'll be releasing those videos soon. And I think that those are really going to help contribute to the conversation around how, as educators, we can use AI to get to that transformative learning. We're also working with our research and development team on a framework for evaluating AI-powered tools. And so this is not going to be a framework where you can look at it and we will say, yes, you should use that tool. It's going to be a set of indicators and really questions to ask yourself that will help you make an informed decision. And so we've started by looking at several frameworks that are already out there, but also asking district leaders, asking building level administrators, and asking educators who are in the classroom, what are the things that you believe that we need to consider in our framework? And so we've released the first draft of that framework, the first draft of insights from those educators that our research and development team is going to be using to inform that actual framework. And so that framework should be released later this fall. So that's kind of our first high level that we're working with educators. Then we've got foundational learning experiences, which we dig a little bit deeper. So you can see we've got some online courses. We're offering webinars with educators. This gives people a little bit more of a deep opportunity to engage with some follow-up. And then the one that's the most fun for me are our deep learning experiences. We are convening communities of practice with educators where we have year-long experiences where we engage both in person and virtually for them to really explore some type of problem of practice that impacts them in their work directly. And then we help them kind of think through that problem rather, and do a little bit of very informal action research in their own classrooms or their own schools to think about how might they use AI in a transformative way. And then we also have a 15-hour AI Explorations for Educators course, and we'll be releasing a new version of that this fall. And we're working on a couple of other longer form courses that are offered online for educators. So all of that to say, we've been doing a lot of work directly with teacher leaders, building level leaders, as well as district leaders. And so I want to dig in, just give you some examples on this category 2, which is the pedagogical integration section of the framework. And so in this, you can see that the 3 areas that Dr. Husa already mentioned are instructional design, adaptive learning design, and learner support mechanisms. And so I just want to share a couple of ways that we have seen educators using AI in transformative ways, we believe transformative ways, that would fall under this pedagogical integration. So one of the things that an educator shared with me was that in a lot of times introducing content to students can be a little bit dry, and sometimes students can be disinterested. So this educator is using AI to write stories that feature their students that are in their classroom, that introduce the content to their students, which is really fun. And so the student hears their first name in the story and maybe hears, one of their hobbies that the teacher knows the student really well. And then there's this story that introduces the content. And that would take a really long time as an educator to write those stories on your own. But when you have AI as a companion, you can do that a lot more quickly. And that is an example of where those students are really going to feel connected to that learning because those stories are about them. And you can do that in a way that protects their privacy, but also the student can see themselves in the story. I've also talked with educators really who, when you think about this adaptive learning design, have adjusted the pacing for their students, that, they are able to use AI to say, okay, this is my lesson, this is how long I believe it's going to take, but I have these groups of students that have these learning needs, and I have this group of students that has this learning need, and I need you to help me adjust the pacing for my students and then provide alternate activities. And so that is another example of that. I also, Dr. Husa mentioned support for those that are learning English for the first time. And so we see a lot of students in the United States who are new to our country. And so you can absolutely use AI to help translate into home languages. We have an educator who works in the Northern Mariana Islands, and she has been using AI to connect with the native language of her students and help them with that, but also as a bridge to parents, which is really interesting. Another example of adaptive learning design that is not something new, but it's something that we can do more quickly that's impactful for students, is creating challenge questions or activities for advanced students who might finish early. So, those are just a few of the examples. One educator that we're working with is working with a teacher. She is at the building level, but she's working with a teacher in her building to create her own space in an AI tool. There's a particular tool they're using, and they're creating it about the history of their town because they have a town that has a rich history. And this little space is going to essentially become a chatbot that allows students to research and learn about, over 100 years of history of their hometown. And so again, you see that, the students feel like they belong. We're cultivating belonging. We're connecting the learner to the learner. And these are some things that wouldn't necessarily be possible for a student to interface with a chatbot and learn about their hometown without the use of AI. Of course, they might be able to find that information in old newspapers and, other artifacts from the town, but to actually have a conversation is really great. One other example, and then I'll stop just because I notice our time. But one other example that I'll share that I love was an educator who shared with me, I think it was last week or the week before, that in an elementary school classroom, they're learning about the planets. And so they, as a classroom, the teacher was manipulating the AI tools because the use case, they want to make sure that they are within the acceptable use policy of the tool. But the teacher asked the AI to assume the role of, I think they were looking at the planet Saturn. And so they asked AI to become Saturn, if you will, and then they let the elementary school students ask different questions of Saturn. Hey, Saturn, tell me what it's like on you, like if someone were to live on your planet. And so the students were able to engage with Saturn, which is just a really interesting idea. So you can imagine elementary students who are learning facts about planets would be so much more engaged in the learning when they felt like they were having a conversation with a planet. So we're just seeing educators do what they do best, which is what I love, which is engage with students in meaningful ways and use this technology to really be transformative. So those are a few of the examples. Really appreciate the opportunity to share today, and would love to hear from those of you in the audience what you're doing. So please do stay connected. I've put my email address on there and would love to hear from you all.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for this engaging presentation. It's really interesting how you framed the shift from simply using AI for efficiency toward transforming how we teach and learn. This distinction is very important, especially in a time where the tools are evolving faster than pedagogy. My question for you is, as you see, there is growing concern that AI might reduce the need of deep thinking. How do you think educators can use it instead to spark the critical thinking rather than replace it?
That's a great question. And it's really interesting because a lot of the conversations that I've had, when you start to think about how you use AI, we've almost seen an increase in the amount of critical thinking that you have to have, because there's so much evaluation of the output when you work with an AI tool. As we've talked about today, you really have to think critically about what it's giving you, and you have to be an expert in a lot of senses in the content that you are working with it. So, as Professor Chris mentioned, if you are an educator and you already have that deep knowledge of teaching and learning, you're going to be at an advantage over someone who just has technical knowledge of AI, especially when you are using that in an educational setting. And so I think the same is true with our students. If they're working alongside an AI tool, they have to really think critically about what the output is that it's giving them, what that means for them, and what that looks like. And I think this also bridges into that conversation about academic integrity. I know there's a lot of concern about, students using AI to complete their assignments. And so we've tried to reframe this conversation, and really we're encouraging educators to have discussions with students. And I've actually had these discussions with my own children at home. I have two that are in college, and I have one who is only 13, and so he's still in middle school. And we're asking students to really think about how this use is going to impact their learning. And so if you are using a tool in a way that you feel is going to help you learn better, that's a good use of the tool. But we also say, if you are using this tool to replace your thinking, to do the thinking for you, is that really going to help your learning? And so maybe you want to think about not using it in that situation. But I think it's really important to empower our students to have these reflective moments where they think about their own learning, and decide whether the use of this AI tool is going to help them, or is it really going to be detrimental to what they're learning. And, you know, I think that this is also one of those conversations where one of the best ways to stop students from cheating is not necessarily to use an AI detector. We've seen those don't work very well, but it's to create activities that students care about, that they feel are meaningful to them. And so, you know, to me, that's the best way to ensure that critical thinking will continue and that students won't do what we've previously labeled as cheating. If they feel like an assessment or an assignment is of value to them, they're going to be less likely to substitute their thinking for AI in that situation.
Amazing. And can you please tell us or share with us an example of how you have seen the transformational learning principle in action, especially in a course or setting where AI is involved?
Yeah, sure. So this is one of my favorite examples. An educator was and I like to use elementary examples because I think that there are fewer of them. I think a lot of times elementary teachers who are working on fundamental skills are a little bit worried that AI is going to take the place of those skills. And so I want to share an example that I think not only is an example of connecting learning to the learner, but also cultivating belonging, and in a way that this educator really used it to pull out the creativity from that student and to really think about you know, their own skills in writing. So there was an elementary teacher that was teaching students how to do descriptive writing. And one of the hardest things when you're teaching students to write is to help them understand this idea that your first draft is not going to be your final product, right? That it is, again, it is about refining and iterating on your writing to get to the best product. And so this student was doing a descriptive writing task. And when the student came up to the teacher's desk and said, "I'm finished." And so the teacher said, "Okay, you just described a picture that you have in your head, right?" And the student said, "Absolutely. I know what I have in my head and I just wrote about it." So the teacher said, "Okay." And she put the writing of the student, and again, this was with permission and with privacy protections in place, put that student's writing, typed it into an AI chatbot, an image generator, and asked it to generate the image based on the student's writing. And so the image popped up, and the teacher asked the student, "Is this what you had in your mind?" And the student said, "Not at all." And she said, "Okay, I need you to go back to your desk and I want you to work on your piece of descriptive writing. And then when you're ready, bring it back up to me." Okay. And so the kid went back very excited to rewrite and to add more descriptive language. And this process happened 3 or 4 times until the teacher finally put it in and the student said, "That's it. That's exactly what I had in my mind." And it allowed the student to really be excited about the learning in a way that typically with descriptive writing, it's hard to get to multiple iterations of writing. So that was just an example that I absolutely loved. I have the image that the AI image generator eventually generated and what the student wrote, and it's just beautiful. It's way more descriptive than what you would typically get from an elementary school student.
That's a very interesting story. Thank you so much, Jessica, for your presentation, for your insightful, really, thoughts. I would like to call you all, please, our distinguished speakers, for an open discussion. I'll ask you all, as educators now have access to more data than ever, thanks to AI, but more data doesn't mean always better insights, right? So what do you think the skills do teacher needs to have to make these data more meaningful? Starting with you, Professor Chris.
So I think that the core to personalization is knowing what to do when you do have data about a student And one of the things that we see often is that teachers know a lot about learning because of different kinds of capacity building they've experienced, but they don't know much about motivation. I've taught a course at Harvard on motivation for many years, and it's not just engagement, it's self-efficacy and growth mindset and other beliefs like that. It's tenacity and resilience and other dispositions. It's the ability to self-regulate and be metacognitive about what's happening to you as a way of achieving your goals. And a lot of process data isn't so much about learning as it is about the student losing interest, or the student getting stuck, or the student running up against of a belief that holds them back. And so helping teachers in concert with AI to personalize motivation as well as personalizing learning, I think is a really important frontier for us.
Amazing. I totally agree with you, Professor, that each student has different or needs different motivation than the other, as we personalize the learning and the learning path and the kind of assessment that the student need to have as equal, that we have to give them the right motivation for each student. Thank you so much. Dr. Hassa, your thoughts on that?
Yes, so I think it's really important that teachers understand the ethical and responsible data use, data privacy, like I mentioned earlier, and we all talked about, is very critical. Ethics is very critical, and also ability to interpret the data and communicate these findings to the school administration or parents, et cetera, to support student learning pathways and growth. And also to be able to adapt their teaching strategies. I think a lot of what we do as technology is every year there's new trending technology list, and each and every time we have to adapt and learn how to use it responsibly, and we have to learn how to use it in a way that encourages student engagement, motivation, as Professor Didi mentioned, and just to be able to use it in an effective manner. Our role as educators may be it's a big challenge and a lot to process, especially for I would say educators that have older educators and those who have not been as exposed to digital technology and AI as much as the newer or novice educators have been. And I think it's really important that we understand how we can personalize instruction, how we can identify learning gaps, and how we can actually support student learning progress, but also maintaining trust within the educational ecosystem.
And I would just add to that, I think, when we think about using data to drive instructional decision-making, I think the skill that teachers need the most is knowing their students well, right? If you have these numbers that say something, you also know what that means for your student. In the same way that Professor Chris talked about, the AI doing the reckoning and the humans having that judgment because we understand the context around it. I think the same is true when we look at data and students and how we engage with those data. We have to know our kids. We have to know what makes them successful, what frustrates them, what excites them. And if we as educators build those relationships with our students first, then I think that to me is the best skill that educators can have for working with data.
And if I could add to that, Jessica, Professor Didi, I'd read an article that he had written about not what AI can do. We need to understand not what AI can do, but what AI cannot do, if I'm not mistaken, and just intelligence augmenting, using it to support and enhance learning. And I think a lot of people would be very interested to hear more about how intelligence augmentation, and I know our session was a little bit shorter today, but I think in the future as well, we'd love to learn more about your thoughts and process, and you as well, Jessica, on more examples and how exemplary teachers, for instance, are using AI to augment or supplement their learning.
Sure, we're looking forward to that. Thank you so much. I'm going to take a question from the audience. Someone's asking, how can we effectively encourage teachers to confidently embrace their evolving role from being transmitter of information to becoming guides to design a meaningful learning experience, especially as AI takes over the routine tasks? So, Dr. Hassa, what do you think?
Could you repeat the question again? I didn't catch the first part.
Yeah, sure. How can we effectively encourage teachers to confidently embrace their evolving role from being transmitters of information to becoming guides and designers of the meaningful learning experience?
I think one of the ways that we could do so is by encouraging co-design. I think we've started doing this at PNU in some of our courses, where we actually have the students help us design and become our co-designers in developing projects or course evaluations, etc. And I think having basic AI literacy is very helpful, and being able to integrate it within your instructional design is also so upskilling teachers and giving them the tools necessary and the resources.
Jessica, we lost your voice. Okay, thank you so much. Professor Chris?
I think you're muted.
I think the real frontier for teachers is to not believe what the AI companies are telling us, and not believe what the uncritical optimists or uncritical pessimists are telling us, but to ask, what are my strengths, and how can I use AI to empower those strengths, and to recognize that the outcomes that we want from education are perhaps the most important change in AI. That yes, AI is changing how we learn and how we teach, but what we value, we use, and by we, I mean not only K-12 education across many countries, but I mean Harvard University and elite universities across the world. We use high-stakes, summative, psychometric tests to determine quality. You need those good scores on those tests to get in, from the Gaokao to the SAT. You need good scores on the tests when you graduate to get into med school or law school or graduate school in general. And those are reckoning tests. Those are tests that AI does really well on without understanding 1 ounce of the content. So if we emphasize reckoning as our outcome, we're training students to lose to AI in the workplace. It's harder to teach for judgment. It's harder to measure successful teaching for judgment, but AI empowers new forms of assessment and teaching that help us to accomplish that. One of the resources linked to my website is a report that a colleague and I wrote from the Next Level Lab at Harvard that talks about what is it like to teach for judgment instead of teaching for reckoning. And I think that may be the key shift that we need to talk to teachers about.
Can I just quickly add that I don't think that this is a new concern either. I think that since, previous to the generative AI bursting on the scene in the last couple of years, this has been a shift that educators have been wrestling with, right? Because the role of the teacher used to just be to deliver content, because that content wasn't available for those students in any way other than going to school, or if your family had the means to purchase one of those large encyclopedia sets that you had in your home. But then once the internet happened and students now had access to more information and more content, that's really, in my opinion, when the shift started to have to happen, as from the teacher being the deliverer of content to the teacher building meaning with that content and teaching skills. And so I think we've been wrestling with this for a long time as educators. I think that AI is just highlighting it and bringing it to the forefront, because it's, you know, this is a shift that we've needed in education, and it's hard to think about how to teach differently when that's not how you were taught. A lot of educators are just repeating the practices of the ways that they learned as a student. And so we have to help educators think differently. And so I think sometimes it's really just a paradigm shift of just thinking differently and being willing to do something that's a little bit uncomfortable and, you know, may feel a little dangerous because you've never experienced that as a learner. And so then releasing some of that control might feel a little bit scary.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hassa, would like to hear from you.
So I think also we need to keep in mind that we need to also integrate them in policy and strategy, you know, AI policy and strategy within aligning it with our you know, ministries and educational institutions, et cetera. And I think the most important thing that we can do right now as educators is also be open to having these conversations, and professional learning communities really have helped a lot of the teachers I know learn from others, and what is this teacher doing and how are they integrating AI and what are they doing to combat plagiarism, and how are they allowing for more critical thinking, allowing their students to actually explore and not use it like what was mentioned earlier, not use it for the output alone, but to really allow for using it as a collaborator, if you will. And so I think it's really important that we support teachers and have the resources available to them as well.
So, Dr. Hassa, if you could give one guiding principle to educators to end with, to stepping into the world of AI for the first time, what would it be?
AI is not here to replace. And no matter how many times we did have this discussion, it's, you know, AI will replace, et cetera. I think just focus on using AI in a thoughtful, responsible manner. And you know, it's not human. It's not going to understand our cultural nuances, and it's not going to understand, not at this stage. So I think it's just there to support our teaching.
Amazing. Professor Chris?
I think teachers are facing a huge challenge now because we know that the next several decades are going to be very difficult time in history. In 2020, I co-edited a book that was about new models of lifelong learning. And I and my co-authors began the book by saying, we have to prepare people for a really difficult series of decades because climate change, failure to reach any of the UN sustainability goals, advances in technology, not just AI, but other technologies, are going to create a turbulent and disruptive time, maybe similar to a century ago, where a generation faced 2 world wars, a great pandemic, and the Great Depression. Well, since that book was written, we've had the pandemic, we've had Gen AI, and now we have a very complex set of political challenges occurring across the world. And so unfortunately, that forecast, if anything, was an underestimate. So teachers really need to think about preparing students to thrive on chaos, if you will. And that's different than teaching students how to climb some imaginary ladder and follow some wonderful set of recipes that work, and everything will be fine. So I think understanding, again, the shift in outcomes is really important for teachers.
I totally agree with you. Thank you so much, Professor Chris. Any last thoughts, Jessica?
Yeah, so I think if I had a guiding principle for educators who are trying to use AI for the first time, I think it would be allow yourself to be creative and use your imagination, because one of the to me, the ways that educators get the most out of AI is by just letting their imagination kind of go and think about what is something that I've always wanted to do, but maybe I haven't had time, maybe I haven't been able to do that. And so just be creative and let yourself just kind of think outside of what you have previously been able to do, but also do that carefully and with those data privacy protections in the back of your mind, maybe even in the forefront of your mind.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And for those who are asking about the AI competencies framework published by the National Learning Center, you can find it on the NELC website, and we'll post the link on the chat. I'd like to thank you all for such a thoughtful and inspiring and deeply grounded conversation. Today's discussion has reminded us that integrating AI into education is not just about tools or trends. It's about the purpose and the ethics and the kind of future that we want to shape as educators and decision makers. So from intelligence augmentation to the evolving educator identity, from the responsible frameworks to the transformational learning and thinking, we have seen that AI is not here to, as you mentioned, all replace educators, but to challenge them, to grow, to adapt, and to realize how we can teach and learn. With that, I would like to thank you once again and hand things back to our host to close the webinar. To you, Zaid.
Thank you. The unfolding conversation and the exchange of ideas during today's session have powerfully demonstrated the transformative potential inherent in shared knowledge and active engagement. We are profoundly appreciative of your presence, which significantly enriched the dynamic nature of our discussions. It is our sincere hope that the insights and perspectives delivered throughout the session provided substantial value and deepened the understanding for each participant. Our profound gratitude is extended to our esteemed panelists, whose expertise significantly enriched our dialogue. Equally, the active participation of every attendee has been integral to the success of this discussion. As we conclude, our focus shifts toward continuous improvement and growth. A survey link has been made available in the chat section, and we cordially invite you to share your feedback and suggestions. This input is crucial as we endeavor to elevate our content and ensure future sessions are even more impactful. On behalf of the National E-Learning Center, I'm Zaid Rgeb. Thank you for joining us today. Goodbye.